CCTV footage captures Abdi, 21, walking around just minutes prior to committing a horrific attack caused by a drug rivalry in the area. In the early hours of January 16, 2024, a quiet residential street in Hounslow became the scene of a brutal and senseless killing. Tyrese Scott, a 24-year-old man with dreams still ahead of him, was left bleeding to death in the dark after being stabbed in the chest. The attackers didn't linger. They got back into their car and drove off, leaving Tyrese alone, scared and fatally wounded. He would later die from his injuries. The motive? A suspected turf dispute, drug dealing, rivalry, and the unforgiving world that comes with it. But what set this case apart wasn't just the violence, it was how the killers were caught. One of them, Douala Abdi, had dumped his clothes after the attack but couldn't bring himself to part with his fake Louis Vuitton man bag. That single mistake became the key to unlocking the case. This is the story of a murder driven by competition, enabled by knives and solved through sharp police work. A young man lost his life, and 4 others threw theirs away over street power, pride, and silence. In the end, it was a designer bag that did what no one else would, told the truth. Beneath the surface of London's suburban calm lies a violent undercurrent that has claimed far too many lives. Drug dealing in the capital is more than just the exchange of cash for substances. It's a business defined by power, control, and territorial pride. For those involved, any threat to that territory is met with swift and brutal retaliation. This was the world Tyrese Scott found himself in. Tyrese, 24 years old, was no stranger to the street economy. Prosecutors acknowledged he had some involvement in drug supply, and on the night he was murdered, he was allegedly operating in an area controlled by rivals. But his role in that world, however murky, did not justify what followed. On January 16, 2024, Tyrese became the victim of a calculated and cold attack, one that prosecutors would later call callous and cowardly. Douala Abdi from Acton and Ben Lang from Feltham saw Tyrese not as a person, but as a problem, someone dealing where they didn't want him. The exact nature of their beef may never be fully known. Police and prosecutors couldn't determine if Tyrese had ever met his killers before, but in the drug world, a name doesn't always matter. It's the territory that counts. And that night, Tyrese was in the wrong place. Lang and Abdi arrived in Hounslow just before 1 a.m. They were in a hire car with a GPS tracker fitted, one of many small oversights that would later help police build their case. As they pulled up beside Tyrese, both men got out. In that brief encounter, Abdi stepped forward and delivered a fatal stab wound to Tyrese's chest. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speak. He just struck and left. Lang, the getaway driver, didn't stab Tyrese, but he stood by during the attack, watching, and then drove the pair away from the scene. Prosecutors argued that he knew exactly what was going to happen and supported it. Both men acted together in what the court later described as a shared and deliberate plan. Tyrese collapsed on the pavement. He was left with no help, no final words, and no one beside him. Neighbors later reported hearing the commotion, but were unaware of just how serious it was. By the time emergency services arrived, it was too late. Tyrese had bled out and died alone. Judge John Hill KC later described the killing as part of a wider plague, drug dealing and knife crime, overlapping in a city increasingly scarred by violence. He said that while Tyrese was no angel, he was also not acting aggressively or threatening when he was attacked. He was vulnerable, unarmed, and cornered. And for that, he paid with his life. The case highlighted once again how easy it is for everyday disputes in the drug trade to spiral into fatal confrontations. Tyrese's murder wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about control. And in trying to keep it, 2 young men made a choice that would cost them everything. The murder itself lasted seconds, but its consequences would ripple for years. In the early hours of January 16, 2024, Tyrese Scott was walking through a quiet part of Hounslow when a hire car slowed beside him. Inside were Douala Abdi and Ben Lang, both already involved in local drug activity. What happened next was described in court as a swift, coordinated ambush. CCTV footage later recovered by police showed the pair pulling up, stepping out, and approaching Tyrese. Abdi wasted no time. Armed with a knife, he plunged the blade into Tyrese's chest before retreating. Lang stood close, watching, then quickly followed Abdi back into the car. Within moments, the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving Tyrese alone and mortally wounded. Witnesses heard the commotion, but didn't realize the gravity of the situation until police and paramedics arrived. Tyrese had suffered a single but fatal stab wound. Despite emergency efforts, he died on the street, a young man cut down with no warning, no chance to defend himself, and no one beside him as his life slipped away. Prosecutors told the jury this was no random attack. Tyrese was likely targeted because of his presence on what was considered rival turf. In the world of street-level drug dealing, such perceived trespasses often lead to violence. It's a world where lines are invisible but fiercely protected, where even a rumor can spark deadly consequences. Abdi and Lang fled the UK shortly after the killing, boarding a flight to Morocco in an attempt to vanish before the investigation could catch up with them. But that decision would only delay the inevitable. Within days of returning to the UK, both were arrested at Stansted Airport and taken into custody. Tyrese's death shocked his family and friends. In court, relatives described him as a kind, funny, and loyal young man. He was 6 feet 3 inches, gentle despite his size, and known for his cheeky smile. His mother stood in court holding a photo of his coffin, telling the court, "This picture is the outcome of what carrying a knife leads to." It was a moment that silenced the room, a reminder that behind every headline there's a life lost and a family left behind. The attack wasn't spontaneous, it was planned, deliberate, and cold. And though Abdi would later claim he wasn't the stabber, and Lang insisted he didn't know what was about to happen, the evidence said otherwise. Their actions that night, getting in the car, approaching Tyrese and fleeing, spoke of intent. A team with a purpose. And that purpose was fatal. For all their planning, Douala Abdi and Ben Lang made one fatal mistake. They underestimated how much evidence they left behind. What began as a clean getaway quickly started to unravel, and at the center of it all was a designer bag, a fake Louis Vuitton man bag that Abdi simply couldn't let go. After the murder, Abdi ditched his black trapstar jacket, the blade, and most of his clothing from that night. But when he fled the scene, he held on to the man bag. Whether it was pride, vanity, or habit, the decision to keep it turned out to be his undoing. The bag, with its distinctive strap buckle, was spotted on CCTV, seen before, during, and after the attack. As investigators reviewed footage, they noticed that the same man bag consistently appeared in multiple scenes featuring Abdi. This visual link, combined with the trapstar hoodie he wore, gave officers a clear thread to follow. And it wasn't just footage. Mobile phone data placed both Abdi and Lang in the area at the time of the murder. Their devices moved in sync, connected to the same cell towers, and matched the GPS trail left by the hired car they used during the attack. The car itself, a rental vehicle, came fitted with a GPS tracker, a detail neither man seemed to consider. After the murder, the vehicle was traced from Hounslow back to other parts of London. Police obtained the rental records and quickly tied it to Lang. When they discovered he had handed a known drug phone, referred to as the Rocky line, to another associate before leaving the UK, the net tightened further. Backed by this mountain of digital evidence, detectives tracked the men's movements after the murder. CCTV from the airport showed both Abdi and Lang boarding a flight to Morocco just days after the killing. They stayed there briefly, but their return to the UK was uneventful until they landed at Stansted Airport. Waiting for them was the Metropolitan Police. Both were arrested on arrival. Further investigation revealed even more connections. Phone calls between Lang, Abdi, and others in the days after the murder were recovered and analysed. Police determined that the pair had received help in their attempt to cover their tracks. Two individuals, Rida Mohammed and Morgan Allen, were later convicted for perverting the course of justice. Mohammed was in a relationship with one of the defendants and had helped organise their escape. Allen, acting under instructions, was involved in logistics and assisted with coordination while the men were on the run. The jury was told that the evidence was overwhelming. The man bag might have seemed like a small thing, but it tied Abdi directly to the scene. Combined with phone records, GPS tracking, CCTV, and testimonies, it painted a full picture of what had taken place and who was involved. In a world where criminals increasingly rely on tech, street knowledge, and silence to escape justice, this case was a reminder that one overlooked detail, one bag, can open the door to the truth. From the moment Tyree Scott's body was found on the pavement in Hounslow, the clock started ticking. Detectives knew they were dealing with a targeted killing, fast, deliberate, and driven by more than random violence. The urgency to find those responsible was immediate, and thanks to a mixture of new technology, forensics, and traditional police work, it didn't take long for things to fall into place. The investigation was led by the Met's Homicide and Major Crime Command, with Detective Inspector Paul Fagan at the helm. CCTV footage from surrounding streets was gathered within hours, and the distinctive image of the suspect, wearing a black Trapstar hoodie and a Louis Vuitton-style man bag, gave the team their first solid visual lead. Witnesses described a car pulling up, two men approaching Tyrese and then fleeing in the same vehicle. Detectives quickly identified the car as a hire vehicle, which, crucially, was fitted with a GPS tracker. Every movement made before and after the murder was logged, from the approach to the scene to the route taken when the pair fled. The car was traced back to Ben Lang, and from there, phone records helped place both Lang and Abdi at the scene during the crucial time frame. Another breakthrough came from mobile phone data. The men's phones were found to have travelled together, bouncing off the same masts and moving in sync with the hire car's route. The number of connections, including messages, calls, and shared locations, painted a clear digital map of their movements. Lang's known drug line, the Rocky line, was also passed off to another contact before he left the UK, suggesting clear planning to distance himself from evidence. When the pair fled to Morocco, authorities moved fast to coordinate their arrest. Their time abroad was brief, days, not weeks. And when they returned to the UK, officers were ready. Abdi and Lang were arrested at Stansted Airport and taken into custody. Interviews were conducted, evidence was presented, and though both men denied their involvement or shifted blame, the case against them was already watertight. Alongside the two murder suspects, police also charged Rida Mohammed and Morgan Allen with perverting the course of justice. Both had helped the men after the killing. Mohammed, who was in a relationship with one of the accused, assisted with travel plans and acted as a go-between. Allen helped with logistics, phone handovers, and managing communication while the pair were abroad. Each received 4.5 years in prison for their role in helping two killers attempt to disappear. Detective Inspector Paul Fagan later said, "This case is a tragic reminder of how the supply of drugs has devastating consequences on communities." He praised the coordination between surveillance, mobile phone data analysis, and ANPR technology that tracked the suspects' movements across London. But at the heart of the case was one goal: justice for Tyrese. And through methodical, relentless work, detectives delivered it. The trial unfolded at the Old Bailey with all eyes fixed on the two men accused of a crime that shocked an entire community. Douala Abdi and Ben Lang stood trial for the murder of Tyrese Scott, a young man whose life was cut short by a single knife wound in the early hours of a cold January morning. For 5 weeks, the court heard how the pair had worked together, planned their actions, and carried out a killing that was as senseless as it was deliberate. The prosecution laid out a detailed timeline. From CCTV footage showing their approach, to GPS logs of the hire car's movement, to mobile phone mast data proving their location, there was no room for doubt. One image, again and again drew attention. Abdi, walking with a black Trapstar hoodie and a fake Louis Vuitton man bag with a distinctive strap buckle. That same bag was seen before, during, and after the stabbing, and it became the crucial link tying him to the crime scene. He had dumped his clothes, but not the bag. It was, prosecutors said, the detail that finally closed the net. Both men denied the charges. Abdi claimed he wasn't the stabber. Lang admitted being there, but said he didn't know what was going to happen. The jury didn't believe them. The evidence was simply too strong and the coordination between them too clear. Both men were found guilty of murder and possession of a knife. Douala Abdi, just 22, already had a conviction for carrying a blade in 2022. He was in breach of a suspended sentence when he killed Tyrese. Ben Lang, 21, had no criminal record before this case, but the court was clear. He had played an equal role. His driving, his presence, and his actions after the murder, helping Abdi flee and dispose of evidence, made him just as responsible. Both were sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 22 years each. Judge John Hill, KC, didn't hold back in his final remarks. He described the killing as callous and cowardly, and part of a wider pattern. Two crimes often overlapping that can probably be called a plague on society in general: drug dealing and knife crime. He said that while Tyrese Scott had been involved in drug dealing, there was no suggestion he posed a threat that night. He was caught off guard, unarmed and defenseless. During sentencing, Tyrese's family gave heartbreaking statements. His mother spoke with strength and pain. She described Tyrese as the gentlest person I know, despite his 6 feet 3 inches frame, calling him kind, loyal, and funny. She held up a photograph of his coffin and said, "This picture is the outcome of what carrying a knife leads to." Her voice broke as she added, "I hope no other mother has to feel the way I do." His grandmother addressed the defendants directly. "You took away a bright young man with a future full of promise," she said. "He should have outlived me. He should have grown, thrived, and lived his life." The courtroom fell silent. There were no excuses left, only consequences. Two others, Raider Mohammed and Morgan Allen, were also sentenced. Both were found guilty of perverting the course of justice. Mohammed had been in a relationship with one of the men and helped coordinate their departure from the UK. Allen assisted with communications and logistics. Each was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Detective Inspector Paul Fagan, who led the investigation, described the case as a tragic example of the cost of drug-related violence. "Drug dealing is an ugly business," he said. "It has devastating consequences for communities, and this case shows how quickly a life can be lost over control and ego." For the Scott family, the sentences offered some justice, but not closure. Tyrese is gone, and while his killers will spend decades behind bars, the pain left behind doesn't disappear. Still, in the end, justice was delivered, not by force or revenge, but by evidence, patience, and truth.